Hey guys, tonight we're going to shatter some popular myths and dive headfirst into a brutal reality that was anything but glorious. Forget the horned helmets and the romanticized sagas. We're talking about why being a Viking warrior was, in fact, absolutely horrible. Imagine a life where violence was a constant shadow, hygiene was a luxury, and a good day meant you might not starve or freeze to death. You're about to step into the rough, worn boots of a Viking. And trust me, you probably won't survive this journey with all your limbs intact or your teeth in your head. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Also, drop a comment below with where you're listening from and what time it is for you right now. Now, dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You're born, not into a cozy nursery with soft blankets, but into a harsh northern landscape. Think windswept coasts, unforgiving mountains, and long, dark winters where the sun barely bothers to show its face. Your birth isn't a celebration of innocence. It's the arrival of another potential mouth to feed, another body to toughen against the relentless elements. From your very first breath, the world around you is a teacher of hardship. You're immediately exposed to the biting cold, the rough textures of homes built from timber and turf, and the ever-present smell of wood smoke, animal hides, and unwashed bodies. There's no central heating, no soft mattress, just the raw, primal reality of a world that demands resilience. Your earliest memories are likely of stark simplicity and constant effort. Food isn't abundant, it's hard-won, often meager, and heavily dependent on the seasons. You learn quickly that every morsel, every piece of warmth requires labor. You see your parents, your older siblings, constantly toiling, fishing, farming small plots of tough grain, tending livestock, or hunting in sparse forests. This isn't a childhood of playdates and gentle lessons. It's an immediate immersion into a struggle for survival. You're a tiny, vulnerable cog in a vast, unyielding machine of subsistence. It's like being born into a perpetual outdoor survival camp, where the only prize for winning is not dying. The air itself feels different, crisp, cold, carrying the scent of salt from the sea and the damp earth. You learn to read the sky, to feel the subtle shifts in wind that signal approaching storms. There's no escaping the elements. They are an ever-present force shaping your life. Even inside your home, the cold seeps in, and the smoke from the central hearth, while providing warmth, also fills your lungs and stings your eyes. Comfort is a fleeting luxury, not a given. Mainstream historical fact: Vikings originated from the harsh, cold regions of Scandinavia, modern-day Norway, Sweden, and Denmark, where the climate and limited arable land heavily influenced their subsistence strategies and nomadic tendencies. Here's a quirky tidbit. While often depicted with long beards and wild hair, archaeological evidence suggests that Vikings were surprisingly meticulous about personal grooming, often carrying combs, ear spoons, and toothpicks. So, even though your life was brutal, you probably at least tried to keep your beard free of crumbs, unlike some of your modern counterparts. Imagine surviving a raid, only to be judged for your split ends. Open scholarly debate phrase. Historians still argue about the exact population numbers in Viking-age Scandinavia and the carrying capacity of the land, with some scholars emphasizing environmental pressures as a primary driver for expansion, while others highlight social and political factors. The precise role of ecological hardship in sparking the Viking Age remains a nuanced point of discussion. From a very young age, you're initiated into the rhythms of this hard life. You learn practical skills necessary for survival, how to tie knots for fishing, how to handle a small knife for chores, how to tend a fire, how to recognize edible plants and dangerous animals. Every lesson is pragmatic. Every task geared towards efficiency and self-reliance. There's no room for childhood fantasies or elaborate toys. Your dolls are carved from wood scraps. Your games mimic the adult world of hunting, fishing, and combat. You're not just playing. You're rehearsing for a future that will demand every ounce of your strength and cunning. This brutal beginning, this constant battle against the elements and scarcity, molds you. It strips away any illusion of ease, replacing it with a grim determination. You become resilient, hardened, perhaps even stoic. You learn that weakness invites disaster, and that survival is a perpetual act of will. Your body adapts, becoming accustomed to cold, hunger, and exertion. This is the crucible in which a Viking is forged, not in some glorious training academy, but in the relentless, unforgiving embrace of the northern wilderness. It's a boring history for sleep. Perhaps, but it's a chilling insight into the fundamental struggle that shaped every single life in the Viking Age. Long before the raids even began, you've survived your harsh northern birth, immediately entering a world that demanded resilience. This early exposure to hardship wasn't a phase. It was the defining characteristic of your childhood, a brutal period spent training, not playing, for a warrior's existence. Forget building elaborate sandcastles or chasing butterflies. Your youth was a relentless apprenticeship in survival and combat, preparing you for a life where violence was always a lurking possibility, and strength was your most reliable currency. Imagine your days. There's no formal schoolhouse with gentle teachers. Your education is entirely practical, taught by your elders, your father, uncles, older brothers, and the other men of your community. You learn by doing, by observing, by mimicking. From the moment you're strong enough to wield a small stick, you're taught the rudimentary movements of combat. You wrestle, you spar with blunt wooden weapons, you practice throwing rocks with precision. These aren't just games, they are drills, preparing your muscles and instincts for the inevitable clashes that lie ahead. It's like being in a perpetual, mandatory gym class, where the coach occasionally throws actual axes. Your physical conditioning is constant. You endure cold, hunger, and exertion without complaint. You're expected to carry loads, to participate in the daily chores of farming, fishing, and hunting, which are themselves physically demanding. You learn to navigate the rugged terrain, to track animals, to withstand long hours of exposure. This isn't about becoming fit. It's about forging a body that can endure immense punishment and perform under extreme duress. There's no room for softness, no tolerance for weakness. Your body is a tool, and it must be sharpened daily. Beyond the physical, your mental resilience is also forged in this crucible. You're taught to be stoic in the face of pain, to suppress fear, and to confront adversity with grim determination. Emotional displays are discouraged, seen as weaknesses that could jeopardize the group. You learn early that complaining achieves nothing, and that self-pity is a luxury you cannot afford. This creates a hardened psyche, capable of enduring the psychological stresses of raiding and warfare. It's like a constant mental boot camp, designed to eliminate any hint of fragility. Mainstream historical fact. Viking-age children, particularly boys, were raised in a harsh environment. undergoing rigorous physical training and learning practical survival and combat skills from a young age to prepare them for a life that often involved warfare and raiding. Here's a quirky tidbit. Archaeological finds, like small, blunt wooden swords or axes, suggest that children practiced with toy weapons that mimicked the real thing, much like children play with toy guns today. So, even their playtime was often a grim rehearsal for the realities of battle. Imagine a playroom where action figures are actually training tools for future raids, and dress up means donning rudimentary armor made of scraps. Open scholarly debate phrase. Historians still argue about the precise age at which boys formally began their intensive warrior training, with some scholars suggesting it started as early as 7 or 8, while others propose a more gradual integration into adult roles over adolescence. The specific chronology of a Viking warrior's formative training remains a nuanced point of discussion. You also learn the art of the saga, the importance of reputation. You hear tales of great warriors, of heroic deeds, of glorious deaths in battle. These stories aren't just entertainment, they are moral lessons, blueprints for how a man should live and die. You learn that fame, or lofor, is a form of immortality, a way to live on beyond your physical demise. This instills in you a desire for glory, a willingness to take risks, and a profound understanding that a noble death is preferable to a cowardly life. Your childhood friends are your future comrades. You learn to rely on each other, to fight alongside each other, to share the burdens and dangers of your existence. These bonds, forged in early hardship, become incredibly strong, vital for survival in a world where individual strength is necessary, but collective action is paramount. Your playgroup is essentially a pre-raid tactical unit. So, your childhood isn't a period of carefree innocence. It's a relentless, uncompromising preparation for a life defined by struggle, violence, and the ever-present threat of death. Every game is a lesson, every task a drill, every day a step closer to becoming the hardened warrior your society demands. You are forged in the crucible of the northern lands, tempered by the cold and the threat of violence, ready to face the brutal realities of the Viking Age. It's a boring history for sleep, perhaps, but it's a chilling insight into the fundamental sacrifice of innocence that shaped every single Viking warrior. You've been forged in the crucible of a harsh childhood, your body and mind hardened for the life of a warrior. Now, the time comes for your first voyage, your first true taste of the wider world, and with it, a new kind of misery, the longship's misery. Forget any romantic notions of majestic sails catching the wind and heroic voyages. Your time on a longship was often cramped, cold, perilously dangerous, and profoundly uncomfortable. It's like being stuck in a perpetually damp, violently rocking sardine can for weeks on end, with no plumbing and questionable snacks. Imagine stepping aboard a longship for the first time. It's beautiful. Yes, sleek and elegant, perfectly designed for speed and shallow waters, but it's also remarkably open. There's no enclosed cabin for you to retreat into, no cozy berths for comfortable sleep. You're exposed to the relentless elements, the biting wind whipping off the waves, the stinging spray of the sea, the constant dampness that permeates every thread of your wool clothing. When the sun shines, it's a brief respite. When a storm hits, it's a living nightmare. You are truly at the mercy of the sea. The space is incredibly cramped. These ships were designed to carry warriors, not to offer luxurious living quarters. You and your comrades would be packed in, shoulder to shoulder, between benches that served as rowing stations and sleeping spots. Personal space is a forgotten concept. You live, eat, and sleep in close proximity to dozens of other men, with very little privacy. The air quickly becomes thick with the scent of unwashed bodies, stale food, and the ever-present tang of salt and tar. It's a smell that will forever be etched in your memory, a constant reminder of the longship's unique brand of misery. The voyages themselves are perilous. You're crossing vast stretches of open water, often without proper charts, relying on dead reckoning, the stars, and the sun. Storms can arise with terrifying speed, turning the calm sea into a churning, violent maelstrom that tosses your small vessel like a toy. One rogue wave could swamp the ship. One snapped oar could leave you helpless. One sudden gust of wind could tear the sail and leave you adrift. Every journey is a gamble. Every mile a prayer to the gods you hope are paying attention. You're not just sailing, you're perpetually flirting with a watery grave. Mainstream historical fact. Viking longships, while highly effective for raiding and exploration, offered extremely cramped and exposed conditions for their crews, subjecting warriors to the full force of the elements, constant dampness, and little to no privacy during long voyages. Here's a quirky tidbit. To protect themselves from the elements and to potentially catch some sleep, Viking warriors would sometimes pull their shields over their heads or create makeshift shelters using hides or cloaks stretched over the thwarts. So, your bed was often just a hard wooden bench, and your blanket was a potentially wet shield. Not exactly five-star accommodations. Open scholarly debate phrase. Historians still argue about the precise speed capabilities and typical daily distances covered by various types of Viking longships, with some scholars emphasizing their remarkable efficiency for raiding, while others highlight the challenges of sustained, long-distance ocean voyages for crew, comfort, and logistics. The nuances of maritime endurance remain a point of discussion. Food on board is meager and monotonous. Dried meat, hardtack, perhaps some dried fish. Fresh water is a precious commodity, carefully rationed. You quickly learn to appreciate every bite, every sip, knowing that supplies are finite and resupply uncertain. Sickness can spread rapidly in such close quarters, turning a minor cough into a ship-wide epidemic. One man's stomach bug can become everyone's problem, and there's no onboard infirmary. Sleep is a restless, fragmented affair. You're always alert, always listening to the creak of the timbers, the slap of the waves, the shifting of your comrades. You sleep in shifts, huddled together for warmth, your dreams likely filled with the endless rocking of the boat and the biting cold. There's no true escape from the reality of the ship. Even if you manage to close your eyes, the longship's misery is a constant, physical presence. So, while the longship is your chariot to adventure and plunder, it is also a source of ceaseless discomfort and terrifying vulnerability. It's where your endurance is truly tested, where the harshness of your upbringing finds its ultimate expression. The romance of the Viking Age fades quickly when you're freezing, wet, hungry, and cramped on a wooden boat, miles from shore, hoping a storm doesn't send you to the bottom. It's a boring history for sleep, perhaps, but it's a chilling insight into the brutal reality of Viking seafaring. You've just endured the relentless discomfort and inherent dangers of life aboard a longship, constantly battling the elements and the cramped conditions. But the true purpose of these harrowing voyages, and the most visceral misery of being a Viking warrior, comes when you finally reach land the raid. Forget strategy and glorious battlefield maneuvers. You face terrifying bloody combat against desperate defenders, often in chaotic, brutal skirmishes where survival is less about skill and more about sheer luck and savagery. Imagine the moment your longship scrapes against a foreign shore. There's a sudden, chilling silence, broken only by the lapping waves and the beating of your own heart. Then, the signal is given. You leap from the ship, often into cold, shallow water, your axe or sword already in hand, your shield raised. This isn't an organized army formation. It's a terrifying, swift assault. You sprint towards the nearest settlement, a monastery, a village, a small town, a blur of fury and violence. The combat is brutal, messy, and intensely personal. You are not fighting a professional army on an open field. You are fighting desperate farmers, terrified villagers, perhaps a few poorly armed guards, all defending their homes, their families, and their lives. They might be wielding pitchforks, rusty swords, or simply rocks. Your advantage is surprise, ferocity, and your superior weaponry. But their desperation makes them unpredictable. You hack, you slash, you push forward, driven by the need for plunder and the instinct for survival. There's no honor in this chaos, just the grim business of taking what you want. The sounds are overwhelming. The clang of metal on metal, the shouts of men, the screams of the terrified, the roar of flames as buildings are set alight. The smells are even worse. Blood, smoke, sweat, and fear. Your senses are assaulted, your adrenaline pumping, blurring the lines between attacker and defender. You see comrades fall, their lives ended abruptly by a lucky blow or a desperate lunge. You yourself are constantly in peril, dodging crude weapons, deflecting blows with your shield, searching for an opening to strike. This isn't a glorious charge. It's a scramble for survival in a maelstrom of violence. Mainstream historical fact. Viking raids were typically swift, brutal, and often opportunistic assaults on coastal settlements, monasteries, and undefended towns, characterized by violent combat, plunder, and the capture of slaves. Here's a quirky tidbit. While often depicted as hulking brutes, Viking warriors were known for their agility and speed, relying on rapid assaults and hit-and-run tactics rather than prolonged sieges, which benefited from their longship design. So, you might be less of a lumbering giant and more of a terrifyingly fast, axe-wielding sprinter. Imagine trying to explain to your family that your job requires both extensive cardio and occasional dismemberment. Open scholarly debate phrase. Historians still argue about the precise motivations behind Viking raids, with some scholars emphasizing economic factors like a desire for wealth and land, while others highlight social pressures, political instability in Scandinavia, or even a warrior ethos seeking glory. The primary drivers for Viking Age expansion remain a nuanced point of discussion. The goal is not conquest, but plunder. You grab what you can: silver, gold, textiles, livestock, and, often, slaves. There's no time for careful inventory or leisurely collection. You move quickly, efficiently, knowing that resistance could coalesce or reinforcements could arrive. The raid is a smash and grab, a brutal smash, and a desperate grab. You might emerge laden with goods, but you also emerge covered in grime, sweat, and the blood of others. Your hands raw, your muscles screaming. The psychological toll is immense. You are inflicting terror, witnessing immense suffering, and constantly facing the very real possibility of your own violent death. This isn't just a job, it's an act of dehumanization, both of your victims and subtly, of yourself. To survive, you must suppress empathy, embrace ruthlessness, and become an instrument of destruction. The images, the sounds, the smells of the raid will linger in your mind, a grim stain on your soul that no amount of ale or campfire stories can truly wash away. It's a boring history for sleep. Perhaps, but it's a chilling insight into the barbaric, terrifying reality of a Viking warrior's daily bread. You've just survived the brutal, chaotic reality of a Viking raid, the adrenaline fading to leave behind the grim taste of blood and smoke. But the dangers don't end on the battlefield or at sea. Back on the longship, or perhaps in a newly established settlement, you face another pervasive misery that could end your life just as swiftly as an enemy's axe disease on every voyage. You're constantly at risk from sickness, far from any healer, with rudimentary understanding of hygiene and no modern medicine to offer a shred of relief. Imagine the conditions on a longship. We've talked about the cramped space, the constant dampness, the lack of privacy. Now add to that the utter absence of sanitation, human waste, leftover food scraps, and stagnant water would all contribute to a breeding ground for bacteria. Personal hygiene, while perhaps attempted with combs, was a far cry from modern cleanliness. Washing yourself thoroughly with fresh water was a luxury you simply couldn't afford on a long journey. And washing your clothes was even rarer. You're essentially living in a petri dish, surrounded by dozens of other men in similar states of uncleanliness. It's like being trapped on a cross-country bus with 40 unwashed gladiators, and everyone has a persistent cough. The food, too, is a source of potential illness. Dried meat and fish, while practical for storage, could spoil. Contaminated water, especially if drawn from unfamiliar sources on foreign shores, was a constant threat. One bad meal, one sip of tainted water, could lead to violent dysentery, debilitating cramps, and relentless vomiting. Dehydration would set in swiftly, and without effective rehydration solutions, your strength would drain away rapidly, leaving you weak and vulnerable. A simple cold or flu, which you might brush off in modern times, could be a death sentence. In close quarters, respiratory illnesses spread like wildfire. A cough could become pneumonia. A fever could turn into delirium. There are no antibiotics, no antivirals, no pain relievers beyond perhaps some herbal remedies or a swig of ale. Your body's own immune system is your only defense, and it's constantly battling a barrage of pathogens that would send a modern person straight to the emergency room. Mainstream historical fact disease, often exacerbated by poor hygiene, contaminated food and water, and cramped living conditions on longships and in settlements, was a significant cause of mortality among Vikings. Here's a quirky tidbit. While the Vikings weren't exactly bathing daily, archaeological evidence shows they used ear spoons and toothpicks, indicating a concern for some aspects of personal grooming. They might have been less filthy savages and more pragmatically unhygienic with a surprising attention to oral health. So, you might die of dysentery, but at least your teeth were reasonably clean. Open scholarly debate phrase. Historians still argue about the specific types and prevalence of diseases that most impacted Viking populations, with some scholars emphasizing parasitic infections and foodborne illnesses, while others highlight respiratory diseases and outbreaks like smallpox introduced through contact with new populations. The epidemiological landscape of the Viking Age remains a nuanced point of discussion. If you fall ill on a voyage, your prospects are grim. There's no doctor on board, no specialized medical equipment. Your comrades might offer some basic care, perhaps a poultice of herbs or a shared flask of mead, but their knowledge is limited. and their focus is on the journey. You're a burden, a liability, and if your condition worsens, you might simply be left to the mercy of the sea or a desolate shore. No Viking wanted to carry a dying man. Every person on board had to pull their weight. Even once you establish a temporary camp or a new settlement, the threat persists. You're encountering new environments, new local pathogens, and often new food sources your body isn't accustomed to. Epidemics could sweep through entire communities, decimating populations with horrifying speed. Death by disease was a constant companion, an invisible enemy far more insidious than any armed foe. So, while the glory of battle might promise a swift, honorable death, the reality for many Vikings was a slow, agonizing demise by disease, far from the warmth of their hearth and the comfort of their kin. Your quest for plunder and fame was constantly overshadowed by the microscopic armies that silently threatened your very existence. It's a boring history for sleep, perhaps, but it's a chilling insight into the fundamental vulnerability that plagued every Viking warrior, even the mightiest among them. You've just considered the insidious threat of disease, a silent killer on every longship voyage. But if illness didn't claim you, the brutal reality of combat often left a different, equally agonizing legacy wounds. Forget cinematic heroics where a hero shrugs off a sword slash. You suffered gruesome injuries with primitive medical care, facing agonizing pain, a high risk of infection, and the very real likelihood of permanent disfigurement or debilitating disability. It's like undergoing major surgery in a muddy field, with rusty tools, no anesthetic, and a 50-50 chance of tetanus. Imagine the aftermath of a raid or a battle. You're bleeding, perhaps from a deep axe cut to your arm, a spear thrust to your side, or a shattered bone from a shield bash. The pain is searing, immediate, overwhelming. There's no sophisticated pain management, no morphine drip to dull the agony. You might get a swig of ale or a chew of a pain-numbing herb, but the primary sensation is raw, unadulterated suffering. You just have to grit your teeth and endure it. The immediate medical attention would be rudimentary at best. Your comrades might roughly bind your wound with strips of cloth, perhaps a piece of torn linen or a scrap of leather. There's no understanding of sterile technique. The cloth might be dirty, the hands applying it unwashed. This immediately introduces a massive risk of infection. A seemingly minor cut could quickly turn into a festering, pus-filled horror, leading to fever, gangrene, and ultimately, a slow, agonizing death. It's like putting a Band-Aid on a gaping wound. But the Band-Aid itself is made of mud and regret. For deeper wounds, your prospects are even grimmer. A shattered bone might be crudely set, leading to a lifelong deformity or chronic pain. A deep abdominal wound would almost certainly be fatal, as internal bleeding and widespread infection were unavoidable. There are no X-rays to assess damage, no surgical procedures to repair organs, no blood transfusions to replenish lost vitality. Your only hope is that the wound isn't too severe, that your body can fight off the inevitable infection, and that you have enough sheer stubbornness to survive. Mainstream historical fact: Viking warriors suffered frequent and often severe injuries from combat, and the primitive medical knowledge of the era meant that infection, chronic pain, and permanent disability were common outcomes, often leading to slow and agonizing deaths. Here's a quirky tidbit. Archaeological discoveries of Viking skeletons often reveal healed, but clearly severe, bone fractures and skull injuries, indicating a remarkable resilience and tolerance for pain. Some individuals survived multiple major head wounds, proving that Vikings were indeed hard-headed in more ways than one. Imagine enduring several skull fractures and then having to remember where you buried your axe. Open scholarly debate phrase. Historians still argue about the effectiveness of Viking Age herbal remedies and folk medicine in treating wounds and infections, with some scholars suggesting a greater practical efficacy than often assumed, while others emphasize the overwhelming limitations in the absence of modern surgical and antiseptic knowledge. The practical success rates of their medical interventions remain a nuanced point of discussion. Even if you survive the initial injury and subsequent infection, you face the prospect of permanent disability, a crippled arm, a limping leg, a disfiguring facial scar, the loss of an eye. These were common realities for aging warriors. These injuries didn't just affect your ability to fight, they impacted your capacity to farm, to hunt, to perform basic tasks. You could become a burden on your family or community, a constant reminder of the brutal cost of your warrior life. The psychological impact of living with chronic pain, disfigurement, and the constant threat of infection is immense. You carry your wounds, both visible and invisible, for the rest of your life. Every ache, every throb, every phantom pain is a memory of the battlefield, a silent testament to the horrors you endured. You might be a celebrated warrior, but you're also a walking testament to the grim, unforgiving reality of medieval combat. It's a boring history for sleep, perhaps, but it's a chilling insight into the profound, lasting misery of being a Viking warrior. Long after the battle is over, you've survived the battlefield's wounds and the unseen menace of disease. But another pervasive misery constantly gnaws at your Viking existence: famine and scarcity. Forget reliable grocery stores or stocked pantries. You confronted constant hunger and limited food supplies, a relentless battle against the very real possibility of starvation that overshadowed even the thrill of the raid. It's like living in a perpetual extreme couponing challenge, where the prize for failure is, well, death. Imagine the lean times. Winter, especially, is a period of desperate scarcity. The land is frozen, the sea often too treacherous for fishing, and game is scarce. The provisions meticulously stored from the harvest: dried fish, salted meat, hard grains, preserved berries dwindle alarmingly. You're constantly aware of the diminishing stores, counting every piece of dried jerky, rationing every handful of barley. Every meal is a stark reminder of your vulnerability to the caprices of nature. It's a constant, low-level gnawing in your stomach, a pervasive anxiety that infiltrates every thought. The success of a raid could offer temporary relief, bringing plunder and provisions. But these were temporary boosts, not a sustainable solution. You couldn't always rely on foreign lands to feed your own. Back home, the struggle continued. Crop failures, harsh winters, or even just a bad fishing season could plunge your community into the depths of hunger. You witness children growing thin, the elderly weakening, and the robust becoming gaunt. The signs of scarcity are etched onto every face in your village. For you, the warrior, this hunger isn't just a personal discomfort. It impacts your ability to fight, to train, to survive. A warrior needs strength, stamina, and clear-headedness. When your body is constantly running on empty, your muscles ache, your mind becomes sluggish, and your endurance plummets. You might be the fiercest warrior in your longhouse, but a prolonged period of hunger could turn you into a shadow of your former self, unable to wield your axe with the necessary power or row your ship with vigor. It's hard to conquer new lands when your biggest battle is against your own empty stomach. Mainstream historical fact: Viking societies in Scandinavia often faced periods of severe food scarcity and famine, particularly during harsh winters or crop failures, which heavily influenced their subsistence strategies and contributed to the motivations for raiding and settlement abroad. Here's a quirky tidbit. To supplement their diets, Vikings often ate a variety of wild plants, berries, and even seaweed, which they learned to forage from their harsh environment. So, when your rations ran low, you might be out gathering nettles or dulse, proving that even a fearsome warrior had to know his local botany. Imagine trying to explain to your comrades that you're an expert forager and a pillager of monasteries. Open scholarly debate phrase. Historians still argue about the precise impact of climate fluctuations, such as the Little Ice Age, on Viking expansion and the degree to which environmental factors drove their movements. With some scholars emphasizing climatic pressures as a primary impetus for seeking new resources, while others highlight social and political factors. The interplay of hunger and migration remains a nuanced point of discussion. The food you do eat is monotonous. Forget culinary delights or varied cuisine. It's functional food gruel made from barley or oats, preserved meat, hard cheese, and dried fish. Fresh vegetables are seasonal luxuries, and fruits are rare. The lack of dietary diversity contributes to nutritional deficiencies, weakening your body's defenses against disease and making you more susceptible to illness. You crave fat, salt, and any kind of sweetness, but those are rarely available. This constant fight against hunger shapes your perspective. Every successful hunt, every bountiful harvest is a triumph. Every failed season is a disaster. You live with the knowledge that your survival is always precarious, tethered to the whims of the weather and the fertility of the land. The glory of Valhalla might await, but the immediate reality is often the gnawing pain of an empty belly. It's a boring history for sleep, perhaps, but it's a chilling insight into the fundamental, grinding misery of scarcity that was a constant companion to every Viking warrior, even when they were not on the battlefield. You've just grappled with the pervasive threat of famine, realizing that the Viking warrior's life was a constant battle against hunger. Now, let's talk about another relentless adversary, one that permeates every aspect of your existence in the northern land's winter's icy grip. Forget cozy fireside evenings and picturesque snowfalls. You battled extreme cold, faced the agonizing pain of frostbite, and endured endless months of darkness, all conspiring to test your endurance to its absolute limits. It's like living in a perpetual freezer, but the freezer is also trying to kill you. Imagine the onset of winter. The days shorten drastically until the sun barely climbs above the horizon, casting long, weak shadows for only a few hours. Then, for months, the landscape plunges into twilight or outright darkness, broken only by moonlight or the flickering aurora. This isn't just a lack of light. It's a pervasive gloom that seeps into your bones, affecting your mood, your energy, and your very will to survive. Seasonal affective disorder. You wouldn't even have a concept for it. It's just winter. And it's horrible. The cold is an ever-present, biting force. Your clothing, made of wool and hides, provides some insulation, but it's rarely enough against the relentless chill that penetrates every layer. Inside your longhouse, the central hearth provides warmth, but smoke often fills the air, irritating your lungs and eyes. Drafts creep in through gaps in the timber and turf walls. Your hands and feet are perpetually cold, and the risk of frostbite is constant. A simple misstep, a prolonged exposure, could mean losing fingers or toes to the merciless bite of the sub-zero temperatures. It's like having every breath feel like a tiny ice pick in your lungs. For months on end, life slows down, but the struggle doesn't cease. Raiding voyages are often impossible due to frozen seas or treacherous storms. You spend more time confined indoors. But even there, the work of survival continues. You tend to livestock, repair tools, mend clothing, and carve wood. Every task is made harder by the cold. Your fingers stiff, your muscles sluggish. The scarcity of food, which we just discussed, becomes even more acute, adding another layer of anxiety to the endless chill. Mainstream historical fact: winters in Viking Age Scandinavia were long and harsh, characterized by extreme cold, limited daylight, and scarce resources, posing significant survival challenges for the population. Here's a quirky tidbit: to survive the darkness and cold, Vikings often relied on fat lamps, burning animal fat or oil, which produced a smoky, flickering light. Imagine spending your evenings in a dimly lit, smoky room, the air thick with the smell of rendered animal fat. It certainly makes a modern LED bulb feel like a miracle. And no, you couldn't just Netflix and chill by the light of a fat lamp. Open scholarly debate phrase. Historians still argue about the precise impact of specific mini ice ages or periods of prolonged cold on Viking Age societal shifts, with some scholars suggesting a significant role in motivating migrations and raids, while others emphasize the adaptability of Norse communities to their challenging climate. The direct correlation between climate and historical events remains a nuanced point of discussion. Sleep is often fitful. Huddled together with your family or comrades for warmth, you still feel the creeping cold. The constant battle against hypothermia drains your energy even while you rest. The lack of sunlight affects your body's natural rhythms, contributing to fatigue and a pervasive sense of malaise. You dream of warmth, of sunlight, of fresh green growth, but awaken to the same relentless darkness and biting cold. The isolation of winter can also take a mental toll. Travel becomes difficult, limiting contact with other communities. You are confined to your longhouse or your small settlement, with the same faces day in and day out. The vast, empty, frozen landscape outside feels oppressive, a silent, menacing presence. There's no escape from winter's grip, no quick flight to warmer climes. You simply endure, waiting for the brief, precious return of the sun. So, while the thrill of battle might be the image of a Viking warrior, the daily reality for many months of the year was a relentless, grinding struggle against the elements. The cold was an enemy as formidable as any shield wall, and its victory meant frostbitten limbs, failing strength, and a slow, agonizing slide into oblivion. It's a boring history for sleep, perhaps, but it's a chilling insight into the fundamental, pervasive misery of winter in the Viking Age. You've just survived the soul-crushing endlessness of a Viking winter, realizing that even nature itself was a formidable foe. Now, let's talk about a grim truth that underpins your entire existence as a Viking warrior. There is no retirement plan. Forget pensions, comfortable golden years, or a quiet cottage by the sea. You are a warrior for life, with no easy escape from hardship, and your utility is constantly measured by your ability to wield an axe, row a ship, and contribute to the raiding economy. Imagine your body. It's a testament to years of brutal training, hard labor, and violent combat. Your bones ache, your joints creak, and old wounds throb constantly. You might have scars crisscrossing your skin, missing teeth, or a permanent limp. But none of this exempts you from the demands of your society. As long as you can still lift a shield or grasp an oar, you are expected to contribute to the collective. There's no easy chair awaiting you, no comfortable retreat from the rigors of life. It's like working a physically demanding job with no option to retire, even when your body is screaming in protest. The concept of retirement, as we understand it, simply didn't exist in the Viking Age. You were a member of a household, a community, and your value was directly tied to your physical capability and your ability to generate wealth, whether through farming, crafting, or, most lucratively, raiding. If your strength waned, your ability to provide for yourself and your family diminished, putting you at risk of becoming a burden, a fate worse than death for a proud warrior. Even if you managed to accumulate some wealth from successful raids, it wasn't necessarily for a life of leisure. That wealth would be invested in land, livestock, or supporting your family and retainers, all of which still required your active management and, often, your physical presence. The idea of simply stopping and living off your past glories was foreign to a society where survival was a constant, active pursuit, mainstream historical fact. There was no formal concept of retirement or pensions in the Viking Age. Individuals, including warriors, were expected to contribute to their households and communities through labor or warfare, as long as they were physically able. Here's a quirky tidbit. Even in old age, a respected elder warrior might still participate in important decisions, offer strategic advice, or even oversee the training of younger warriors. So, while you might not be swinging an axe on the front lines, you could still be the grizzled veteran barking orders from the longhouse. It's like being a seasoned military consultant. Only your office is still a drafty longhouse, and you occasionally have to demonstrate axe techniques to teenagers. Open scholarly debate phrase. Historians still argue about the precise social safety nets that existed for the elderly or infirm in Viking Age communities, with some scholars suggesting strong familial and communal support structures, while others emphasize the harsh realities faced by those unable to contribute economically or militarily. The balance between communal care and individual self-reliance remains a nuanced point of discussion. The alternative to constant contribution was a grim one. If you became too infirm or too weak to provide, you risked becoming marginalized. While your family might care for you, your social standing would inevitably diminish. You might be seen as a mouth to feed without contributing, a drain on resources. This societal pressure meant that you would push yourself far beyond what a modern person would consider reasonable, enduring pain and exhaustion, simply to maintain your utility and your pride. The desire for a glorious death in battle, for a place in Valhalla, also stemmed partly from this lack of a retirement plan. A swift, honorable death with a weapon in hand was often preferable to a slow, debilitating decline into old age, weakness, and irrelevance. It offered a definitive end to the struggle, a guaranteed place in the afterlife, rather than the indignity of fading away, a burden to your kin. It's a grim form of career planning, isn't it? Choose your glorious exit, or face a slow fade out. So, your life as a Viking warrior wasn't a temporary career. It was a lifelong commitment to hardship, to constant contribution, and to the relentless demands of a brutal world. There was no easy off-ramp, no golden parachute. You fought, you toiled, and you endured until your body finally gave out, often in battle, but just as likely from the cumulative toll of endless struggle. It's a boring history for sleep, perhaps, but it's a chilling insight into a life with no planned conclusion other than perpetual struggle or a glorious, violent end. You've been contemplating the stark reality of having no retirement plan, facing a life of perpetual toil and warfare until your body inevitably gives out. This leads us directly to the driving force behind much of a Viking warrior's existence, and another profound misery, the pursuit of uncertain glory, which often leads to certain death. Forget guaranteed fame or a comfortable afterlife. Your quest for renown, for a lasting name, was a high-stakes gamble against overwhelming odds, frequently ending in a violent, unremembered demise far from home. Imagine the tales whispered around the Longhouse fire sagas of legendary warriors, of epic battles, of heroes whose names would be remembered for generations. This was the ultimate aspiration for many, the lofor, or fame that transcended death. You were taught from childhood that a glorious death in battle, with your weapon in hand, was the surest path to Valhalla, the Hall of Odin, where you would feast and fight alongside the greatest warriors. This promise of an honorable afterlife was a powerful motivator, fueling courage and a willingness to face impossible odds. It's like working towards an unlimited vacation package in a glorious, never-ending fight club, where the only way in is to die spectacularly. But the reality of achieving this glory was brutally different from the poetic ideals. Most battles weren't grand, organized affairs. They were chaotic, brutal skirmishes, sudden ambushes, or desperate defenses against overwhelming numbers. You might be cut down by a random spear thrust, drowned in an unforeseen storm, or succumb to a festering wound days later. There was no guarantee that your death would be heroic, witnessed by admiring comrades, or even remembered accurately. You could die in a ditch, forgotten, or simply disappear without a trace in a foreign land. The quest for glory also meant you were constantly putting yourself in harm's way. You sought out conflict, ventured into unknown territories, and engaged in dangerous raids. Every voyage, every skirmish, every encounter with a new population carried the risk of immediate, violent death. Your life was a series of gambles, and eventually, the house, or in this case, the axe or spear, would always win. It's a bit like playing Russian roulette with extra bullets. But the prize for surviving is just another round. Mainstream historical fact. While a glorious death in battle was highly idealized in Viking culture, the reality was that many warriors died in less heroic circumstances, often far from home, with their deeds and names unrecorded or quickly forgotten. Here's a quirky tidbit. The concept of Valhalla, while famous, wasn't the only Viking Age afterlife. There were other realms, like Helheim, ruled by the goddess Hel, where those who died of sickness or old age went. So, if you were aiming for the party in Valhalla, you basically had to make sure you died violently with a weapon in hand. Otherwise, you were off to the quieter, less boisterous afterlife. It was quite literally a death or glory kind of career path. Open scholarly debate phrase. Historians still argue about the precise degree to which the pursuit of fame lofor was a primary motivation for Viking warriors, with some scholars emphasizing its role in shaping warrior identity, while others suggest more pragmatic drivers like economic gain, social status, or land acquisition held greater sway for the majority. The balance between glory and necessity remains a nuanced point of discussion. Even if you performed incredible feats of bravery, your fame was often ephemeral, dependent on oral tradition. Stories would be told, sagas recited, but without written records for the common warrior, Your deeds could easily fade from memory as generations passed. Only the most extraordinary, the most legendary, would truly achieve lasting renown. For the vast majority, their bravery, their sacrifices, their violent ends would be known only to their immediate circle, perhaps for a few decades, before dissolving into the mists of time. This pursuit of an uncertain glory also meant leaving your family and community behind for long periods, or even permanently. Your longing for fame could lead you to distant shores, to unknown dangers, and ultimately, to a grave far from your ancestral lands. The very ambition that drove you also guaranteed your profound separation and, often, your ultimate isolation in death. So, while the promise of glory and Valhalla was a powerful lure, the reality for the average Viking warrior was a life constantly flirting with death in brutal, unpredictable ways, often for a fame that would never truly materialize or endure. Your quest for greatness was more often a pathway to an unremembered end, a grim testament to the harsh realities of a warrior's life. It's a boring history for sleep, perhaps, but it's a chilling insight into the profound misery of a life risked daily for a fleeting, often unattainable, ideal. You've been contemplating the uncertain glory that awaited many Viking warriors, often ending in a less than heroic death. But even if you survived the battlefield, another profound misery could befall you, a fate perhaps even worse than death for a proud warrior: homelessness and exile. Forget a warm hearth and the security of your kin. You risked banishment from your community, becoming an outcast in a hostile world where survival alone was a constant, terrifying gamble. It's like being fired from your job, kicked out of your home, and then dropped off in the wilderness with absolutely no severance package. Imagine the social structure of your Viking world. It was built on intricate bonds of kinship, loyalty, and mutual support within your family, herd, and community. To be a part of this web was to have protection, resources, and identity. To be cast out, to become an Utelager outlaw, was to lose everything. It meant you were literally outside the law, stripped of all rights and protections. Anyone could kill you without legal repercussions, and no one was obligated to offer you aid, shelter, or food. Your life became worthless in the eyes of the law, a haunting, terrifying emptiness. Exile could be imposed for various reasons. You might have committed a grave offense against another family, violated sacred customs, or even simply lost favor with a powerful chieftain. Blood feuds, though sometimes settled with compensation, could also result in banishment if your actions were deemed too egregious or if you simply couldn't pay the required Weregild blood price. Being declared an outlaw meant you were alone, a pariah in a world that valued collective strength and belonging above all else. It's like being permanently disinvited from the entire human race. The physical hardships of exile were immense. You would wander the wild, untamed landscapes, constantly exposed to the elements, always hungry, always cold. You couldn't seek refuge in settlements, as your life was forfeit. You'd have to scrounge for food, avoid detection, and constantly be on guard against those who might seek to harm you for your meager possessions or simply for the grim satisfaction of killing an outlaw. Every rustle in the leaves, every distant dog bark, would send a shiver of fear down your spine. Mainstream historical fact. Outlawry Utlager, or Skogarmader, was a severe punishment in Viking Age Scandinavia, stripping an individual of their legal protections and social standing, forcing them into exile where they were vulnerable to attack and hardship. Here's a quirky tidbit. Outlaws sometimes lived in remote, wild areas, often referred to as forest men skogormader. While romanticized in some sagas, this life was incredibly difficult and solitary, a stark contrast to the close-knit communities Vikings usually lived in. So, while you might get to live out your days as a rugged individualist, you'd also be very hungry, very cold, and probably talking to squirrels. Open scholarly debate phrase. Historians still argue about the precise frequency and duration of outlawry in Viking Age society, with some scholars emphasizing its role as a functioning legal deterrent, while others suggest that many outlaws might have eventually found new communities or joined raiding parties elsewhere, highlighting the fluidity of social boundaries. The practical realities of sustained exile remain a nuanced point of discussion. The psychological toll was perhaps even worse than the physical. The profound loneliness, the constant paranoia, the loss of your identity and status. It would gnaw at your mind. You were a man without a name, without a home, without a future, stripped of everything that made life meaningful in your culture. The bonds of kinship and community, which were your shield and your comfort, were now irrevocably severed, leaving you utterly adrift in a hostile void. This terrifying prospect meant that maintaining your social standing and adhering to communal laws was paramount. The threat of exile served as a powerful deterrent, forcing compliance and discouraging individualistic acts that could jeopardize the harmony of the group. For a Viking warrior, whose very identity was tied to his place within his herd retinue or kindred family, this was a fate to be avoided at all costs, a living death more dreadful than any glorious battle wound. It's a boring history for sleep, perhaps, but it's a chilling insight into the profound misery of social death and existential vulnerability in the unforgiving world of the Vikings. You've just glimpsed the terrifying fate of exile, a social death perhaps worse than physical demise for a Viking warrior. But even within the supposed safety of your community, another pervasive misery shadowed your life. The cold, omnipresent grip of superstition. Forget logical explanations or scientific understanding. You lived in constant fear of unpredictable gods, malevolent spirits, and a myriad of unseen forces, believing that every misfortune, every unexplained event, was a sign of divine disfavor or malicious magical interference. It's like being perpetually haunted by cosmic bad luck, and you have no idea how to appease it. Imagine your world. There's no modern science to explain crop failures, sudden illnesses, or treacherous storms. Instead, these are attributed to the wrath of Odin, the trickery of Loki, the displeasure of the land spirits Landvetir, or the dark magic of witches Volur. Every rustle in the woods, every strange shadow, every unexpected sound could be a sign of a malevolent presence. You constantly walked a tightrope, trying to appease the unpredictable gods and avoid offending the countless spirits that inhabited the natural world around you. It's like living in a horror movie where the monsters are invisible, all-powerful, and incredibly moody. Your daily life was permeated with rituals and precautions. You might leave offerings for the Landvetir to ensure fertile land and safe passage. You'd wear amulets or carvings of Thor's hammer to ward off evil. Before a voyage, you'd make sacrifices to Njörður, god of the sea, hoping for favorable winds. Every significant event, from a birth to a battle, required careful observance of omens and proper appeasement of the divine. You're not just living, you're constantly performing complex high-stakes ritual theater, hoping you don't accidentally anger a deity who can unleash a plague. The fear wasn't just of the great gods, it was also of the more localized, often mischievous or malevolent beings. Draugr, the undead guardians of burial mounds, could rise and haunt the living. Norse trolls or Jotnar giants lurked in the wild, uninhabited places. Elves could be benevolent or dangerous. And most terrifyingly, there were those who practiced Seder, a powerful form of magic, who could weave spells of sickness, misfortune, or even death. You never knew if your neighbor's sudden illness was just bad luck, or if someone had paid a sorcerer to curse them. And perhaps, you too. Mainstream historical fact. Viking Age Scandinavians had a polytheistic belief system heavily influenced by animism, leading to widespread superstition and a belief in a complex pantheon of gods, land spirits, and practitioners of magic, who were believed to directly influence daily life. Here's a quirky tidbit. Ravens, often associated with Odin, were sometimes used as ornithomancy tools, where their flight patterns were observed for omens before important decisions like battles or voyages. So, you might delay an entire raid because a bird flew the wrong way. It certainly adds a layer of avian bureaucracy to military planning, doesn't it? Open scholarly debate phrase. Historians still argue about the precise distinction between formal religious worship and the more localized, for practical magical practices in Viking Age Scandinavia, with some scholars emphasizing a fluid and integrated belief system, while others highlight distinct roles for gods, spirits, and human magic workers. The exact boundaries of their spirituality remain a nuanced point of discussion. This pervasive superstition meant that life was incredibly unpredictable. Success was fleeting. Failure could be attributed to a jealous god or a hidden curse, and personal responsibility sometimes felt secondary to divine whim. You lived with a constant undertone of anxiety, never truly feeling in control of your destiny, always at the mercy of forces you could barely comprehend. Any unusual event, a strange mark on an animal, an odd dream, a sudden unexplained noise, could send you spiraling into dread, seeking a Velva seeress for interpretation or a chieftain for reassurance. The cost of this fear was often practical. Valuable resources might be sacrificed to appease gods. Important decisions might be delayed or altered based on omens. Mental energy was constantly expended on navigating the unseen realm, trying to ensure favor or avoid malevolence. It was a life lived on tenterhooks, constantly trying to read the invisible signs and placate the incomprehensible powers that held your very existence in their cold, supernatural grip. It's a boring history for sleep, perhaps, but it's a chilling insight into the profound misery of a life lived under the constant shadow of unpredictable divine and magical forces. You've just felt the cold, omnipresent grip of superstition, living in a world where unseen forces dictated so much of your fate. This leads to another often overlooked misery of being a Viking warrior, especially one who sought fame the precariousness of your legacy due to oral history's fading fame. Forget meticulously written biographies or immortalized monuments. Your deeds, however heroic, might easily fade from memory without written records, leaving your quest for renown reliant on the unreliable whispers of future generations. Imagine returning from a successful raid, laden with plunder, having performed incredible feats of bravery. You are celebrated by your community. Songs are sung about your exploits. Sagas begin to form around your name. This is your Lofor, your fame, the immortality you strive for. But this fame is fragile. It exists primarily in the spoken word, passed down from storyteller to storyteller, from generation to generation. There's no printing press, no digital archive, no fixed record to ensure its permanence. It's like having your incredible achievements recorded solely on a series of TikTok videos that could be deleted at any moment. Oral traditions, while powerful, are inherently fluid. Details can change, stories can be embellished or forgotten, and emphasis can shift with each retelling. A brave act might become exaggerated, a mundane journey transformed into a grand adventure, or, more devastatingly, your heroic deed might simply be omitted from a later version, overshadowed by the exploits of another. The very act of transmitting your fame from memory to memory leaves it vulnerable to erosion, alteration, or outright disappearance. For the vast majority of Viking warriors, their deeds, however courageous, would never truly enter the grand sagas that are remembered today. Those sagas tend to focus on kings, chieftains, and particularly legendary figures. Your heroism in a small skirmish, your resilience on a brutal voyage, your cunning in a difficult trade, these were vital for your immediate survival and the well-being of your hired household. But they rarely warranted a dedicated epic poem that would resonate through centuries. Your fame, if you achieved it, was usually local and ephemeral. It was like being a brilliant local band, but never quite breaking into the national charts. Mainstream historical fact: Viking Age society largely relied on oral tradition for transmitting history, poetry, and sagas, meaning that the fame and deeds of most individuals were not permanently recorded and could easily fade from collective memory over generations. Here's a quirky tidbit. To help remember lengthy sagas and poetic verses, professional skalds. Poets used intricate mnemonic devices and complex poetic structures, like Kenning's compound metaphorical expressions, whale road for the sea. So, your bid for immortality might depend on how cleverly some poet could describe your shield as a battle board or your sword as a wound snake. It puts a lot of pressure on creative wordplay. Open scholarly debate phrase. Historians still argue about the precise fidelity of oral traditions in transmitting historical events over long periods, with some scholars emphasizing the inherent flexibility and potential for distortion, while others highlight the mechanisms within oral cultures that could maintain remarkable accuracy for significant events and genealogies. The reliability of oral historical transmission remains a nuanced point of discussion. This reliance on oral history meant that true, lasting glory was an incredibly rare commodity. You might die heroically in battle, but if no one survived to tell your story, or if the storytellers found another, more dramatic tale to tell, your sacrifice could simply vanish into the mists of time. This profound uncertainty about your legacy adds another layer of misery to your quest for renown. You strive, you fight, you suffer, and you die, hoping to be remembered. But the very mechanism of remembrance is fragile and unreliable. The ultimate quest for a Viking warrior was not just to live, but to matter after death, to achieve a fame that defied the grave. But the reality was that oblivion was a far more common outcome than eternal renown. Your brave deeds, your moments of valor, would be whispered for a time, perhaps, but the long, relentless march of generations and the lack of fixed records meant that silence was the most likely inheritor of your story. It's a boring history for sleep, perhaps, but it's a chilling insight into the profound misery of a life risked for a fame that might simply dissolve, unrecorded and unremembered, into the unforgiving northern air. You've just confronted the fragile nature of fame in an oral society, realizing that your heroic deeds might ultimately be lost to time. But even if your name was remembered, the immediate, inescapable misery came right after the adrenaline of the raid faded the post-raid aftermath. Forget the immediate celebration or the simple counting of spoils. You dealt with the psychological and physical trauma of violence, the grim necessities of survival, and the cold, hard process of accounting for both losses and gains. It's like going through an intense, horrifying battle, and then being immediately hit with a pile of paperwork and a nagging sense of dread. Imagine the return to the longship after a successful or even partially successful raid. The shouts of combat have died down, replaced by the groans of the wounded, the low murmurs of your exhausted comrades, and the creak of timber as you push off from shore. The air, once thick with the scent of fear and smoke, now carries the cloying odor of blood, sweat, and perhaps the acrid tang of burnt timber. You are physically drained, every muscle aching, your hands raw from gripping weapons and rowing. You might have new wounds, fresh burns, or the dull throb of a recent blow, but the physical pain is often overshadowed by the psychological toll. You've just participated in brutal acts of violence. You've seen things that will haunt your sleep, the terror in the eyes of the villagers, the bodies of the fallen, both theirs and yours, the screams that echo in your memory. You might have inflicted grievous harm, or witnessed your comrades doing so. There's no modern understanding of PTSD, no therapy sessions, no debriefing. You're expected to be stoic, to move on, to suppress the images and sounds that replay in your mind. This bottled-up trauma would fester, leading to nightmares, emotional numbness, or sudden bursts of rage. It's like being forced to swallow a bag of broken glass and then pretend you're not choking. Then comes the grim accounting. You gather the spoils, the silver, the tools, the textiles, the captives, but you also count the losses. How many comrades fell, who is gravely wounded and unlikely to survive the journey home? Who is missing? Perhaps captured or lost at sea. Each fallen comrade represents a lost bond, a gap in the ranks, a family back home that will soon receive devastating news. The jubilation of plunder is often quickly dampened by the cold, hard math of attrition, mainstream historical fact. The aftermath of Viking raids involved significant physical and psychological trauma for the warriors, including dealing with casualties, tending to severe wounds, and coping with the violent acts they had committed or witnessed. Here's a quirky tidbit. After a successful raid, a portion of the plunder was often dedicated to the gods as an offering, or buried in hoards as a form of sacred deposit or hidden wealth. So, even after risking your life, you might have to give up a portion of your hard-won loot to appease the fickle deities or hide it away in a hole in the ground. Just in case. Imagine filling out a divine tax form for your loot. Open scholarly debate phrase. Historians still argue about the precise coping mechanisms and rituals Viking warriors might have employed to deal with combat trauma, with some scholars suggesting that strong communal bonds and a belief in Valhalla provided a degree of psychological resilience, while others emphasize the likely prevalence of unaddressed mental health challenges given the constant exposure to violence. The unseen psychological impact of raiding remains a nuanced point of discussion. The journey home is no easier. You're often overloaded with goods, the ship heavier, the rowing more arduous. Wounded comrades require constant care, adding to the burden. The threat of storms or hostile encounters remains. There's no chance to truly rest or recuperate. You simply push on, propelled by the desire to reach home, to unload your spoils, and to gain whatever temporary respite that might offer. Even once back in your longhouse, the aftermath lingers. The families of the fallen mourn. The wounded become a burden or a testament to suffering. The memories of the raid, vivid and brutal, will replay in your mind. especially in the long, dark winter nights. The glory of the raid is often quickly overshadowed by its grim reality, leaving behind a lasting imprint of violence and trauma. It's a boring history for sleep, perhaps, but it's a chilling insight into the profound, enduring misery that was the true cost of being a Viking warrior. Long after the axe fell and the ships sailed home, you've witnessed the brutal aftermath of a raid, the physical and psychological scars that linger long after the clang of steel fades. This brings us to the final, sobering truth about being a Viking warrior. You lived a life's grim cycle, a relentless, repetitive loop of struggle, sacrifice, and brutal inevitability. There was no easy escape, no comfortable endpoint, just a continuous grind against an unforgiving world, often culminating in an unceremonious end. Imagine your entire existence as a loop. You were born into hardship, immediately thrust into a childhood of grueling training and survival. You learned to endure cold, hunger, and pain, knowing that weakness meant death. You then embarked on long, dangerous voyages, crammed into a longship, battling storms and disease. These journeys led to brutal, chaotic raids, where you inflicted violence and risked your life for plunder, only to return home, wounded and traumatized. Then, the cycle would begin again, recovering, preparing, enduring the endless winter, only to set out once more. It's like being stuck in a particularly violent video game with no pause button and endless levels of suffering. The options for deviating from this path were incredibly limited. You could be a farmer, but that too was a life of back-breaking labor and constant vulnerability to famine. You could be a craftsman, but your skills were still in service of this same harsh existence. To truly escape the cycle of the warrior often meant becoming an outcast, an exile, a fate worse than death. You were born into a system, and that system demanded a specific kind of life, one defined by struggle and the constant threat of violence. Even the promise of Valhalla, that glorious warrior's afterlife, was a grim form of motivation. It didn't offer an escape from combat, but merely a continuation of it, in an eternal, idealized battlefield. It meant that your purpose, even in death, was still to fight. There was no eternal rest, no peaceful contemplation, just more glorious, endless battle. It was less a retirement package and more a post-death contract extension with more fighting. Mainstream historical fact. The life of a Viking warrior was characterized by a cyclical pattern of seasonal raiding, subsistence farming, and enduring harsh environmental conditions, with little opportunity for social mobility or escape from a life of hardship and potential violence. Here's a quirky tidbit. Despite the harsh realities, archaeological evidence suggests Vikings sometimes enjoyed leisure activities like board games like Tafel, a chess-like strategy game, storytelling, and feasting during non-raiding seasons. So, even amidst the grim cycle, there were moments of respite, where you could briefly forget the cold, the hunger, and the violence, and just play a strategic board game. Imagine playing a complex strategy game after planning real-life raids, perhaps using your latest conquest as a pawn. Open scholarly debate phrases. Historians still argue about the extent to which Viking Age individuals felt trapped by this grim cycle, or if they embraced it as a proud cultural identity, with some scholars emphasizing the inherent dangers and limitations, while others highlight the values of honor, courage, and adventurous spirit that made such a life appealing to many. The subjective experience of living within this societal structure remains a nuanced point of discussion. The weight of this inevitability, this constant grind, would press upon you. The cumulative toll of wounds, disease, hunger, and bone-deep cold would slowly wear you down. Your body would betray you. Your resilience would be constantly tested. The sagas might sing of glory, but your daily reality was far more mundane and far more agonizing. So, being a Viking warrior was not a tale of endless glory and easy plunder. It was a life defined by an unforgiving cycle of struggle. You endured, you fought, you survived, only to do it all again, until death, in whatever form it took, finally claimed you. Your existence was a grim testament to human resilience in the face of relentless adversity. A life lived on the very edge of survival, always looking towards the next battle, the next journey, the next uncertain dawn. It's a boring history for sleep, perhaps, but it's a profound and chilling insight into the grinding, inescapable misery that was the true Viking Age. Now, gently close your eyes. Let the sounds around you soften, just like the echoes of the longship and the harsh northern winds begin to fade. Feel the weight of these old stories settle into the quiet corners of your mind. Tonight, you've journeyed through a life of relentless hardship, chilling cold, and pervasive danger. A world where heroism was often born of desperation. The clang of steel, the roar of the sea, and the quiet anxieties of hunger now mingle with the soft hum of your fan, carrying you further into comfort. Let the images drift, dissolving into the peaceful quiet that now surrounds you. There's nothing left to do but simply drift, now, into a deep, peaceful slumber. End of script. Sweet dreams.